My name's Rick Delano. I'm a mechanical systems engineer. I'd spent the last 2 years designing a rugged, power-free mobility system for people in rural areas where electricity was either unreliable or non-existent. 6 months ago, I finally finished a working prototype. Simple parts, clean motion, no power needed. I brought it to our pitch meeting with the big client, hoping for funding. In the middle of my presentation, Damon Vance, my department head, stood up and walked right over to the device. Without even flinching, he punched his fist straight through it like he was breaking a stack of tiles. Plastic, titanium, everything went flying. "This is junk," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned to the woman at the head of the table, with a smile that looked like it belonged on a late-night talk show. "We'll start fresh, with a real team." I just stood there, frozen, watching the pieces of my work scatter across the floor. That device wasn't just tech. It was everything I'd put into the last few months. Missed dinners, hand-machined components, everything I believed in. But the client, Adira, didn't look at the mess on the floor. She looked at me and asked for my contact info. I handed her my personal business card, the one I'd printed myself after Vance forgot to order company ones after my promotion. Vance tried to backpedal, calling my ideas impractical and experimental. But Adira wasn't having it. She thanked us and left. When the room cleared out, I bent down to pick up what I could. Vance's voice came from above me. "Leave it," he said. "Maintenance will sweep it up." I told him they were custom parts. He told me the project was canceled and that I was being reassigned to a junior diagnostics team. That's when I realized I'd never been given a chance. Vance had never even sent my documentation to the review board. My design didn't fail. It was buried. 3 days later, my personal cell rang. It was Adira Kessler, the client from the pitch. I almost didn't answer, but then I remembered the look she gave me when she asked for my card. She was still interested. "Rick," she said, like she was speaking to a friend, not a contractor. "I'd like to see more of your work. Privately." I hesitated, already thinking of all the ways this could go wrong. "I can't share anything that belongs to the company. You know that." She was quiet for a moment, but then she said, "I understand. Just bring sketches, concepts, no files." That caught me off guard. Most people would have pushed back, tried to get something more concrete, but Adira didn't. "All right," I said finally. "I'll bring what I can." We agreed to meet at a workshop near the old industrial district, one of those half-forgotten buildings on the edge of town, where factories once hummed but had long since fallen silent. I packed up my notebooks, grabbed some drawings, and threw together a few redesigns from memory. Nothing fancy, just the kind of rough work I used to do back in grad school when I had time to think instead of grind. When I walked in, the place was bustling with activity. The workshop was huge, metal tables cluttered with parts, open racks full of tools, the smell of oil and metal in the air. But what hit me harder than the smell was the people working there. They weren't just engineers or techs. They were the ones who made things work when nothing else did. Real repair techs, guys like Miko, who fixed wheelchairs in the field, patching things up with duct tape and old parts because that's what people needed to survive. And then Adira. She wasn't just a client. She was the head of a massive international nonprofit distributing mobility devices to underserved countries. I'd never realized that part. She was trying to fix a whole lot more than a broken wheelchair. We sat down, and she flipped through my sketches. "This is the kind of thing we've been trying to solve for years," she said. "Battery reliance. It's a nightmare in rural areas. If you can make these devices work without electricity, you're looking at a real breakthrough." I didn't know what to say. I'd been toiling in isolation for so long, I'd never really thought about the bigger picture. But she was right. I had something real, something that could make a difference. Then she dropped the bomb. "I want to make an offer," she said, looking me dead in the eye. "Use my workshop, rebuild the prototypes, and present them at the International Mobility Conference coming up. I'll back you. We'll make sure the world sees what you've done." My head was spinning, but the real kicker came right after that. "Vance will be there," she added, almost like an afterthought. I felt something shift inside me. My throat went dry. All those months of trying to prove myself, trying to fight through his bullshit. Suddenly, it didn't matter. "Does that bother you?" she asked, reading the look on my face. I almost laughed. "Not anymore," I told her. And I meant it. So I started working two jobs. By day, I sat in a diagnostics team that didn't want me, tapping out reports, fixing stuff that didn't need fixing. By night, I was back in the workshop, rebuilding everything. The only thing I had were secondhand parts, the scraps from people who actually use this kind of equipment, and feedback from real techs like Miko. I learned fast. Every mistake was a lesson. The prototypes I built got simpler, tougher, smarter. Every hour spent in that shop taught me something new, something that made the designs work better, last longer. I was finally building things that had a purpose. And somewhere along the way, I stopped caring about Vance. The day of the conference came, and it rained like hell. I called in sick, had to. No way I was going to show up at work after everything that had gone down. Instead, I loaded the 4 rebuilt prototypes into my truck and drove them to the exhibit hall under tarps. They weren't flashy, didn't need to be. These weren't meant to look pretty. They were made for places where electricity was a luxury and parts had to last for years. Tough, simple, and built to survive. My spot was behind a curtain, scheduled for a mid-afternoon reveal. I was early as usual. I took a few moments to check the prototypes over again, just to make sure everything was in place. The main wheelchair, the one I was most proud of, was there. Terrain adaptive, adjustable for kids, easy to repair. I wasn't showing off cutting-edge tech. I was showing something real, something that mattered. I peeked out from behind the curtain. The hall was full of suits and handshakes. They all looked the same, polished, professional, confident. And there, standing with the company crew, was Vance, grinning like a campaign poster. My stomach turned. I could almost hear the smugness in his voice from all the way back in the crowd, even though he hadn't said a word to me since the meeting. At 2:30 sharp, Adira stepped on stage. "Please welcome engineer Rick Delano," she said, her voice steady but with a smile that seemed to hold a lot more meaning than just politeness. The curtain pulled back. I stepped out into the crowd. It wasn't the devices that shifted the room. It was what they represented. You could feel it, the weight of what they meant, the weight of what I was offering. I started my pitch. I didn't try to sell them with flashy language or grandiose claims. I just spoke the truth. Each device used no motors, no batteries. Everything could be fixed with a wrench and a clean cloth. They were simple, durable, and built to last. The main wheelchair model was my focus. I explained how it was terrain adaptive, how it could go through mud, over rocks, or across dirt roads without any electrical components slowing it down, how it was adjustable for kids, easy to repair in the field with basic tools. I kept it straightforward. The crowd leaned in. I could feel their attention shift from curiosity to genuine interest. Questions flew. Real ones, about production, sourcing, licensing. I had answers for every single one of them. I didn't have to bluff. I had done my homework. I'd spent months rebuilding these devices with the help of people who actually understood how things break and get fixed in real life. But I saw Vance's face, pure panic. He started shifting in his seat, his eyes darting between me and the crowd. He tried to push through, tried to make himself heard, but the crowd wasn't paying attention to him anymore. They were all focused on me, on the work, on the real problem being solved. After the pitch wrapped, Adira came over to me, her smile a little wider than before. She led me to a quiet older man who was standing off to the side. He looked like someone who had seen a lot, the kind of guy whose presence demanded respect without him even trying. "This is Varar Lassen," Adira said, her voice suddenly quieter, more respectful. "He's the founder of your company." I froze. I'd heard of him, of course. Every employee had. Varar Lassen, semi-retired now, but still holding weight in the company. "I understand you've been trying to make these devices work for years," he said to me, his voice low but sharp. Vance told the world these kinds of prototypes had failed under testing, that they weren't viable, that he'd already tried them. The words hit me like a punch. I'd heard enough from Vance. I didn't know how far his lies had spread. I didn't know he'd gone as far as to tell the world my designs had failed. But Varar wasn't done. Adira stepped forward, pulling something from her bag. She handed it to him. "Here's his graduate thesis," she said, her eyes locking with mine for just a second. "Everything in these designs existed before he ever joined your company." Varar flipped through it slowly. Then he looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "These are good," he said quietly. "Very good." He handed me his card, his fingers cold but firm. We'll talk about your future, Rick, with or without your current management. My heart pounded. He wasn't just offering a chance to get out of Vance's shadow. He was offering a chance to take everything I'd worked for and make it count. But Vance? He was already gone, slipping out of the room before I could catch his eye. I didn't care. Vance had shown his hand, and it wasn't going to win this time. That night, I crashed at home. The adrenaline from the conference wore off fast, and all I wanted was to be alone. I didn't answer texts or emails, didn't want to deal with anyone. I needed space, quiet. I lay there in the dark, the weight of the day sinking in. Around midnight, Vance called, furious. He accused me of stealing company property, twisting the story the way he always did. I told him calmly that the designs were mine and hung up before he could say another word. Then I turned off my phone completely. I didn't want any more calls, no more messages. For once, I was in control, and I wasn't going to let Vance or anyone push me around anymore. I shut my eyes and let the silence fill the room. It was the first real peace I'd felt in days. The next morning, there was a pounding at my apartment door. I jolted awake, my head still foggy from the night before. When I opened it, Kata was standing there, pale, her eyes wide. I hadn't seen her this freaked out before. "He's trying to fire you," she said, her voice shaky. "Claims you stole designs. Security's already cleared your desk." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What?" "Vance," she repeated, stepping inside. "He's telling the board you withdrew your designs, that you were dismissed. He's been covering his tracks, telling different people different things, but now it's all falling apart. They're calling you a thief, Rick." My stomach turned over. Vance had been setting up this story for a while, and now it was about to come crashing down on me. I hadn't expected it to happen this quickly, but I knew it was coming. I just hoped I'd have more time to figure out my next move. I grabbed my jacket, too stunned to think straight. "What do we do?" Kata shook her head. "I don't know. I tried to stop it, but I'm not in a position to fight this. You need to get up there, talk to whoever you can. Just don't let him do this to you." We left my apartment and walked down to the parking lot in silence. My mind raced, trying to piece together how this was going to play out. But nothing felt real anymore. The anger I'd been holding on to started to burn brighter. Vance wasn't going to get away with this, not without a fight. When we got to the office, security was already waiting by the entrance. They nodded at me, but didn't say a word. I could tell something was off. They hadn't let Kata through. When I asked about it, one of them just gave me a blank stare, like it wasn't their problem. "Rick," he said, pointing up toward the elevator, "you're expected upstairs, executive suite." I didn't need to be told twice. I made my way up, the elevator ride feeling like the longest of my life. My chest was tight, and every floor seemed to drag slower than the last. When the doors finally opened, I stepped out into the cold, sterile hallway. The executive suite was just ahead. I could hear voices through the glass, but none of them sounded familiar. Vance had been busy, and I was walking into a storm I wasn't sure I could control. I took a deep breath and knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and I walked into the lion's den. The room was filled with people I barely knew, legal counsel, a few board members, and then, at the far end of the table, Vance. His eyes caught mine for a split second before he quickly looked away, like he was trying to ignore the fact that he'd been caught. Verer was there too. He didn't look surprised to see me, but his eyes had a weight to them that told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't here for Vance. The tension in the room was suffocating. I felt like the air had gone thick, like everything was closing in. No one spoke. They just looked at me, waiting for something. I didn't know what they wanted, but I wasn't about to play Vance's game anymore. Verer cleared his throat. "Rick," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Tell me your side of this." I didn't hesitate. "The designs are mine. They've always been mine. Everything I showed at the conference is based on my work, on ideas I've been developing for years, long before I ever stepped foot in this company." Vance shifted in his chair, his eyes flickering toward me, but he didn't interrupt. He didn't have to. I knew exactly what he was going to try next. "I'm aware of what's been said about me," I continued. "But what Vance is telling you isn't true. I didn't withdraw anything. He's the one who buried my work, and now he's trying to cover it up by making me the scapegoat." I could feel Vance's eyes on me, but I didn't look back. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. Verer nodded slowly, then glanced at the legal team. "Do we have confirmation on the timeline of these designs?" he asked. Adira, who had been invited as an external partner, spoke up, her voice steady and clear. Yes, everything in Rick's thesis was developed long before he ever joined the company. I could see the cracks starting to show in Vance's carefully constructed narrative. He wasn't winning this round, not this time. I see, Verer said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he turned back to Vance. Rick's work, then, was never properly reviewed. Is that correct? Vance didn't respond right away. He shifted in his seat again, running a hand through his hair. Well, yes, but nothing, Verer cut him off. You didn't even bother to send his designs to the review board. You decided they were unworkable before anyone had a chance to test them. You buried them. And now you've tried to use Rick as a scapegoat. Vance's face went red. That's not enough, Verer said, raising a hand to silence him. He looked back at me, his expression softening just a little. We'll take it from here, Rick. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. Vance had just lost. And for once, it wasn't me on the losing side. After the dust settled, Verer called me into his office. He wasn't just offering me a pat on the back. He was offering a future. I want you to head up a new division, he said, focused on mechanical adaptive tech. We'll partner directly with Adira's foundation to get these devices where they're needed most. It was a big offer, but I had one condition. I'll only do it if I have full control over design, hiring, and transparent access to leadership. No more silos, no more gatekeepers. Verer didn't hesitate. Done. We should have backed you from day one. I wasn't sure if that made me feel better or worse, but I was past the point of caring. 3 months later, our first production run shipped out to 12 countries. It wasn't just a shipment, it was a lifeline. The devices were already changing lives. Kids in remote villages were using them to get to school, no longer stuck in place because of broken, unreliable equipment. Adults who hadn't been able to move independently in years were finally gaining back their freedom. And local mechanics, the people who understood how things broke and how to fix them, were learning how to repair and adapt the gear, turning it into a sustainable solution. Vance, I heard he landed a job at another firm, but from what I gathered, his name didn't carry much weight anymore. I didn't care enough to know the details. Verer got more involved too. He'd stepped back when things were running smoothly, but he wasn't content to stay on the sidelines anymore. He'd said it himself. Watching innovation from a distance didn't suit him, and maybe it was the fact that he'd seen real change happen under his watch. But I respected that he didn't just sit back and let others do the work. He jumped in when it mattered. As for me, I finally got to do what I dreamed of since college. Build things that mattered, not flashy, not corporate, just simple, strong, and human. The kind of tech that could change someone's life with just a turn of a wrench. That was the real win. Not revenge, not rank, but purpose. You want to get back at someone who tried to bury you? Build something so real, so useful, that even they can't ignore it. That's what I did, and that's how you beat a guy like Vance.